Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Nathan and Keith tipped me off this story. Thank you very much, guys. You know, odometer tampering is a crime. I've mentioned this before. There are state laws against odometer tampering, and there are federal statutes on it. And many of those statutes, including the federal one, have a criminal element and a civil element, which means that you can sue somebody for odometer tampering, but they can also be prosecuted criminally by the state or by the feds, depends on where you are. So the question is, do people still do this? And yes, they do. Why? They make a lot of money by rolling odometers back. And every now and then they crack down and bust somebody, and it's usually people who've done it quite a bit. So I had heard a lot of stories about people who bought used vehicles and they found out the odometers rolled back. They can trace it back and find out where roughly it probably happened. And somebody may have just done it just to get more money for the car they're selling. But occasionally dealerships, and you hear about this, occasionally dealerships will be doing this on a wide scale until they get caught. And someone just got caught. So here is the press release from the Department of Justice, Office of Public Affairs. Used motor vehicle dealers sentenced in odometer tampering scheme. So they got caught, found guilty, pled guilty, doesn't matter. They were sentenced. Yesterday in federal court in Brooklyn, a man was sentenced by U.S. District Judge Kiyo Matsumoto to 60 months imprisonment for his role in a long-running odometer tampering and money laundering scheme in order to pay $3.9 million in restitution. So he gets 5 years in the slammer, as we say. The defendant pleaded guilty in August 2020 to conspiracy to commit money laundering, conspiracy to commit odometer tampering, making false odometer statements, and securities fraud. So they got him for all kinds of stuff. The acting assistant attorney general, Brian Boynton, said an automobile is one of the biggest purchases many consumers make. For the average consumer in America, the automobile is the second most valuable thing they'll buy. Your home, then it's the car. Now, if you buy an RV, which I would not advise for obvious reasons, or a boat, I suppose, it's possible those could be larger than the car purchase. But generally speaking, I think the average American, biggest purchase, a house, second biggest purchase, a car. Misrepresenting used car mileages defrauds buyers and hides important information concerning safety and reliability. The Department of Justice will continue to work with law enforcement partners to prosecute odometer fraud. This sentence sends a warning that this office will prosecute those who engage in odometer tampering and deliberately dupe consumers into unknowingly paying inflated prices for their motor vehicles. That's acting U.S. Attorney Jacqueline Kasoulas. With the defendant being sentenced to prison and ordered to pay restitution to his victims, he's being held to account for his greed in contriving his fraudulent scheme. I guess they've had a lot of time to write this press release. Between 2006 and June 2011, the man was conspiring with his brother, and he defrauded buyers of used motor vehicles by misrepresenting the mileage of approximately 690 vehicles that the two of them sold. They sold almost 700 vehicles in a 5-year period. That is a lot of vehicles, my friends. So they used fictitious dealer names to purchase high-mileage used motor vehicles from a national vehicle leasing company, altered the odometers of vehicles to reflect false lower mileages, and then sold the vehicles at wholesale automobile auctions. On average, the odometers in the vehicles were rolled back by close to 70,000 miles. Consumers who purchased the vehicles at dealerships did not know the true mileage and paid inflated sales prices. So this is a little different. I remember a story out of Wisconsin, I think it was, where a couple people who were buying and selling used cars, I think they were just auto flippers, though they didn't have a license to sell cars. And they would simply just replace the instrument clusters and just do this. And they were doing it on a very large scale. But I've also heard of used car lots that do this. And one of the interesting things, and I often forget to mention this, but a lot of people always mention it in the comments, is that in the old days, I'm talking about the 50s and 60s, there were guys who would show up at a car dealership and just say, hey, if you want me to, I'll roll the odometers back in a bunch of your cars and save you a bunch of money. And there were guys who traveled around. That's the job they did. And a guy would just show up at the dealership and say, and need me to roll some odometers back today? Sure. And so that's one of the reasons they have a federal statute on it now. But so these two guys would buy the vehicles from the rental car companies and then they'd roll the odometers back and then sell them at an auction where they get bought by a dealer and sold to a consumer. And so this way, if somebody found out that the odometer had been rolled back, they go, okay, I go back after the dealer. The dealer says, well, we bought it at auction from this guy. And it's just enough layers in it. It probably made it kind of difficult to trace. It's not impossible to trace, obviously, but it can be a little more difficult. So this matter was investigated by the U.S. Department of Transportation, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Office of Odometer Fraud Investigation, and the IRS, believe it or not. NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, estimates that odometer fraud in the United States results in consumer losses of more than $1 billion annually. And individuals with information relating to odometer tampering should call NHTSA's odometer fraud hotline or find more information on the NHTSA website, which is nhitsa.gov. And I've said before that NHTSA is a great resource for consumers. You can go onto the NHTSA website and find out all kinds of neat stuff, and it's nhtsa.gov. But they have on there not just information about that, but you can run the VIN of your vehicle and find out if you've got outstanding recalls and so on. But the interesting thing is that in the old days, the first car I owned, a 69 Dodge Charger, had the old dials behind the plastic that was part of the speedometer head. And, the dials rolled over. And I remember I was actually driving the car when it rolled over all nines back to zeros because it did not have a 100,000 mile indicator. So it went, 999.9 to 0,000. I was on Woodward Avenue when it happened. Didn't have a camera with me, and we didn't have smartphones back then, my friends. So, but back then, depending on the vehicle, people could take the dashboard apart, get the speedometer head out, and then there was, these little plastic wheels and a little piece of plastic on the back. You pop that off, you pull the wheels out, you spin the wheels and set any number you want, put it all back together again, reverse the instructions, the steps there, and put it back together again. And so if you were looking at a used vehicle with one of those mechanical sets of odometer numbers in there, you'd often look to see, for instance, if there were screws that held the dashboard in. Did they look like they were still tight from the factory? Or were there little scratch marks indicating somebody had been in there with a screwdriver, loosening or tightening those? And also, a lot of times people, when they took the odometer thing apart, would twist up the piece of plastic that held the numbers in place. And so a lot of times you get in a car and you look at it, and the numbers would not quite be lined up just right. Some vehicles in the old days, the mileage numbers might not line up perfectly to begin with. So you're not sure, is it bad workmanship from the factory or bad workmanship by some guy in his backyard and a screwdriver? We don't know. But that's one of the reasons that they used to always talk about the things you look at to see if a mileage made sense on a car. So you're looking at some really, really old car. It's got really low mileage. But then you look and you see the brake pedals worn out. And there's tons of wear marks on the floor where the feet go of the driver, or there's all kinds of other things worn out. And you start thinking, does this mileage actually match the wear and tear on the car? And this is not the kind of stuff the average person looks for or even knows what it would look like. But there are guys out there who buy enough and sell enough cars that they go, yeah, that one doesn't quite make sense. And so, of course, if you buy a car and you get the title history, you can look at the mileage at various reported events, like on Carfax, or if you get the title history from the state of Michigan. In Michigan, you just look at the titles. But the interesting thing is that, on the one hand, if the title and the numbers keep climbing and it appears to be appropriate, that's fine. Obviously, the numbers drop dramatically in the middle. Something's a problem, although Carfax and others make mistakes. But if somebody buys a car and they own it its entire life and do their own oil changes, for instance, and only bring it in for warranty work once in a while, it's possible that they could roll the miles back during their ownership and sell it, and there might not be any paper trail of that. Now, of course, that all changed when things on board the car became computerized, control modules and so on. And so there's almost always nowadays, in fact, I believe there is always nowadays, a device in the car that tracks the mileage electronically inside something electronical that is not what's displayed on the dash. So on the dashboard, it's displaying information that came from someplace else. The problem is that someplace else can be replaced as well. And so there are people out there who know how to do that. They can do that. And so that's one of the reasons that this can happen on such a widespread basis. And more people can get away with it now, I think, than they could in the old days. But of course, when they get caught, bad things happen. So it does say dealers, plural, used motor vehicle dealers sentenced in odometer tampering scheme. This just talks about the one guy, does not mention his brother. But if one of them pled guilty and the other one's a brother, I suspect that there might be something happening with both of them. But as of right now, according to headline, used motor vehicle dealers sentenced in odometer tampering scheme, 5 years in jail and a $3.9 million restitution order, all for rolling back odometers on cars. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. The only impossible journey is the one you never begin.